Welcome to the podcast where relationships, confidence, and determination all converge into an amazing, heartfelt experience. This is Speaking from the Heart.
Welcome back to episode number 136 of Speaking from the Heart. Today we have Dr. Jim Salvucci as our guest, and Dr. Salvucci was an English professor and faculty leader when he was asked to become the dean of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at his university. There was one hitch, though. The School of Humanities and Social Sciences did not exist, so he had to found it. He soon realized that his lifelong background as a leader in many settings did not prepare him adequately for the challenge of founding a school. Jim is an expert in writing and communication and a passionate teacher. His varied experience and extensive learning have made him a seasoned public speaker, engaging audiences on 4 continents in a variety of formats, including podcasts, which his is called On Leading with Greatness, summits, and also workshops. Jim writes a weekly newsletter and is also writing a book, Becoming an Entrepreneur: Out to Lead a Movement to Guide Young Managers to Become the Next Generation of Great Leaders. Jim's knowledge of and commitment to leadership and teaching is unsurpassed. I really love Jim's conversation with me today because not only does he bring a perspective from an academic sense, which is always helpful, especially with framing what some of the real-life application of leadership and communication is all about, but it also allows us to really dig deep into not only the principles that are involved with it, but also understanding why it's so important for the wrestling of different concepts such as incompetence, imposter syndrome, and even being able to motivate and have the ability to do certain things can create that position of strength, especially as we work through a variety of different angles in our lives. Regardless of your education level or even who you are, I think you're going to get a lot out of our interview today with Jim and how it meant so much to not only share what these perspectives are, these puzzle pieces, if you will, but it also allows us to understand why it's so important to become not only bold when the challenge presents itself, but also willing to understand that there's more ways than one to solve a problem, even if it takes having the ability to motivate others to lead the charge in a whole new generation and a whole new sense of the meaning of being able to lead from the front. But with that, let's go to the episode. All right, we're here with Jim Salvucci. Jim, thanks for sharing your heart with us today.
Yeah, Joshua, it's great to be here. Happy to share my heart, maybe a little chunk of my brain.
Oh, I think you got a lot on the brain and in the heart from what I've read about you and what my audience now knows about you after hearing a little bit about your background, Jim. So thanks so much for taking time out of your schedule to do this with me. And I really want to start with this question because as somebody that has also been well educated, I don't have a doctorate degree like yourself, but nevertheless, I'm kind of curious what got you started into some of the leadership that you have done. I noticed that you were a faculty member of a well-known college, and I'm wondering if you could tell a little bit about your backstory as it relates to that, because I feel like that's the catalyst to a lot of what our conversation that we'll have today is about.
I've been involved in leadership on some level since I was a little kid. I was in Boy Scouts. I was like 12 years old, and they advanced me to like the top leadership position in the troop for some reason or other. And way before I held the rank that I was supposed to have. And I've just always been thrust in a leadership position my whole life. At 18, I was a boss. I had employees, which was fine. And I was pretty good at it. I wasn't a bad leader. Wasn't a bad boss either. When I went into higher ed, became a faculty member. I was an English professor. I became a faculty leader. So I was working at a small university outside of Baltimore that you've never heard of. And I was a faculty leader. I was asked to lead the reaccreditation. Every 10 years, you have to be reaccredited. That was a big deal. And then they asked me to become the dean of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, which is great. I mean, that was excellent, except for one thing. There was no School of Humanities and Social Sciences. So I had to found it. So I created the School of Humanities and Social Sciences. And what I discovered was putting a school together is actually quite easy. This goes with that goes with this. I had like 6 or 7 departments, I think 15 disciplines. That was easy. What was hard was figuring out how to get it up and running and keeping it running, right? So how do you make this work? I thought, okay, well, I'll look around at what resources I have. I was a pretty good, what I call gut leader, right? I had good intuition, had good experience, but I never really thought about leadership in any rigorous way. But the stakes were way higher now. So I looked at my bosses. They were bosses, and I make a strict distinction between bosses and leaders. They weren't particularly good, and they got no mentorship or guidance or training of any kind. And then I looked at my peers. They were flailing around wildly, totally lost. And I thought, well, this is probably not good, but I did imitate them for a while. You watch people and you think, oh, maybe they're doing it right, and you try other things. And I started realizing I was slipping into perfectionism, workaholism, God forbid, micromanagement. This is not me. So I started thinking about, well, what can I do here? I've got to break away from this. And a few things happened that helped me break away, just some revelations. And I thought, well, I'm on my own here. I got to figure this out. So I started studying leadership. I started thinking about leadership in a rigorous way. I started going to workshops. I started meeting people. I didn't really have any help on my own campus. I was put through a leadership training there that was laughable at best. Insulting, really is the word. And so I really just had to figure out what was going on and how could I be the best leader. So I started treating leadership like a second discipline of study. My first discipline was English. My second discipline was leadership. I tried what I was learning. I failed a lot. I also learned that you can learn a great deal from other people's mistakes. So when my bosses screwed up or my peers, I learned from that. When I watched them hurt people, I learned how not to do that. Eventually, I left higher ed. I left that school and I went to a couple other schools as a vice president, and then left higher ed and thought, well, what do I want to do? And what I really wanted to do was what I used to love doing as an administrator. I used to love working with young people, mentoring them, guiding them, and helping them become great leaders. So that's what I do.
That is really important. I have had guests on the show previously too, Jim, about talking about what is really important when it comes to not only leading, but also communicating. It's one of the things that I feel is so important that sometimes is missed out when it comes to important aspects of not only college education, which, yeah, we get fed a lot of philosophy, a lot of different types of theories, but putting into practice is a whole other discussion in itself. So I am curious, and building off of that comment about young leaders, how do you do that with your work? How do you help others that are budding and they're trying to figure out how to actually lead? What are some of the things that you actually dive into with them?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a coach, so I work individually with them. I'm also looking into starting group coaching. I'm a speaker, so I do it from stage. I do it in podcasts, and I write. I have a weekly newsletter and podcast that I put out on leadership. So in all these places, I really try to get at people's values. The best leaders are values-driven leaders. The number one leadership principle is human decency. Be a decent human. If you start there, you got a pretty good foundation. There's a lot of other principles that come in and I tailor it to each person. When I talk generally from a stage or in a podcast, I talk a lot about things like what I call the 4 C's of leadership. You mentioned communication. That's one of them. The other 3 are character, compromise, and collaboration. I'm not real big on leadership groups. There's a lot of wisdom out there, some great stuff, great books, great speakers. You can learn a lot from them, but I find that a lot of them kind of are pitching their ideas, and there's more individual ways of getting in it. And that's why I reduce things to very small numbers, the 4 C's of leadership, not the 25 C's of leadership. Partially because the human brain can only handle 4 things at a time.
Yeah.
At maximum.
Yeah.
And so it's just easier to comprehend, but also that's all you need. If you have those 4 things, you're a really good leader, right? If you have character, meaning values, if you can communicate, and I can go on and on about communication, but if you can communicate a valuable message, where does that value come from? From your character, right? They all build on each other. If you can communicate, then you can compromise, right? Meeting someone part way. And then if you can compromise, you can collaborate, which is the highest level, really, which means more than meeting people halfway, but really participating, creating a collective. So these are things I talk about quite a bit.
I have to say, what you said about what our messaging is, what you communicate, I often tell people, you said 4, I usually say 3. We're in the ballpark, close enough, because I think that just small chunks at a time make a big difference with saying that. But you said something that's really important too, is that message that's inside of us. If we have good character, good values, that is something that we can easily draw upon, and that would be the effective message. And I had a guest that said, it's the story that we have inside of ourselves. Now, they were talking about writing and being a book author, but it's the same principle with speaking. You have an idea inside of you, you're able to flush that out. And I really love that. You're validating a lot of the good things that I think both you and I work on, and also the other people that are definitely striving to be that. But I noticed something that maybe might be some of the information that catalysts a lot of what we're talking about. And you were talking about your experiences with being able to build the school and helping to put the puzzle pieces together. But I'm wondering, because this is something that I notice in your bio, that you have been through bullying in the workplace, I'm imagining. I noticed that you have some sort of expertise with that. And truthfully, that really gets to my core, because I have been a state civil servant. One of the things I probably didn't tell you about myself, but my listeners know that I've been doing this a long time, but I've found a lot of different personalities in state government, and sometimes they can be a bunch of bullies themselves in the workplace. So I'm wondering if there's some sort of indirect connection between those two topics. And what would you say to somebody that is going through something like bullying in the workplace to help them be able to overcome?
Yeah, it depends on who's doing the bullying, right? I mean, there's techniques for dealing with peer bullying. When the bully's your boss, you're pretty much done. I mean, they have all the power. A lot of people just knuckle under to a bully boss, and that's the worst, because then they become much like the bully boss. They empower the bully boss. If you fight back, though, you're caught. And I've been there. It's like encountering a cop on the street. They have all the power. Or a teacher in the classroom. A teacher who's a bully, you're a student. What are you going to do? They got all the power. So it's imperative. If you're a boss, if you have that position, you're a manager, an executive, whatever your title is, if you oversee people and you bully them, you are incompetent. Find me the part of your job description that justifies that behavior. Tell me what it is. You are undermining your people. You're making them less productive. You're hurting them. And they're probably bringing stuff home, right? But how is it going to help productivity? Oh, yeah, you might get them to jump when you walk in the room, but I can guarantee you they're not jumping when you're not there. So you are, in fact, incompetent.
That is a pretty strong statement, but I agree with you, because they're lacking in that leadership, those communication skills, all of those things. And it makes me wonder sometimes too, where does that come from? Where is that motivation to just bully? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's myriad. One of the reasons I say they're incompetent is because the job of every manager is to make their employees better at their job.
Yeah.
If you're literally doing the opposite of that, very good, right? You suck. But where does that come from? Sometimes it's because they've been bullied and they knuckled under at one time and now they're striking back. It literally is just a building of really in-depth imposter syndrome. Sometimes they just feel overwhelmed. They don't know what they're doing. But I've seen people turn from decent people to bullies when they became bosses. Maybe that's the only model they saw. Maybe they were bullied. And a lot of people, when they become managers, they just replicate what they've seen. And that's what I refuse to do. I had horrible bosses. I'll be damned if I act like them. And so I tried to do the opposite, or not the opposite. It's not always just the opposite of what they do, but I tried to be a different type of person and a different type of boss. And I wasn't always successful. And there may even be times I actually slipped into some bullying, especially early on. When I was a little green, I didn't know what I was doing, right? But I think, to answer your question succinctly, I think people become bullies because bullies beget bullies, right? They were bullied. They get bullied. They bully people. Those people become bullies, just like leaders beget leaders.
I have people that listen to my podcast that also influence leaders and also other individuals, whether that's in a professional realm, whether that's in a volunteer realm. Some of them might be young, so fitting right into the mold of what you specialize in. What would you say, or a couple of things that you would recommend if somebody did get that feedback that you're a bully and you should stop doing this to me and to my other friends that are working with me because you're making me feel like I'm inadequate, all these disgusting feelings, essentially. Is there anything that they can do to diagnose or even treat the illness of bullying?
You're talking about the individual as a bully and they're being told they're a bully?
Correct.
Yeah, stop. I mean,
Not very simple, though, Jim. It's just to stop.
no, I think that idea of incompetence is key, right? Your job is to make other people better at their job. That is your whole job. That is all of it, really. Your ego has to go. I say, take your ego, stuff it in a sack and throw it in the river. You got to work on it. You got a lot of work to do if you're bullying. You got a lot of work to do on yourself. And it starts with the self. You have a lot of introspection. You've got to understand how your actions are affecting people. You've got to understand, would you like this done to you? Your employee messed up and you acted like a beast. Is that proper? What I tell people is there's a special place in hell for bosses who yell. If you're a yeller, I don't know, stop. Just stop. I'll tell you, Joshua, though, I don't have a really great answer for this because I've never had this. I've never had the opportunity to say to someone who is open to hearing it, you're a bully. I've never had that opportunity because bullies don't seek help.
About a decade ago, and I don't know if this person will ever fall on this recording. So if they do, well, they're going to find out the hard way. But yes, sir, I did approach you and I told you straight to your face that you were a bully and you did it to others. And yeah, I got walked out. Just on the record, Jim, because I stood up for myself. And I remember that day as being the lowest point in my life. But then looking back, I remember that being the highest point. And it's all about hindsight at the end of the day, because I didn't realize that, and this was in my 20s, by the way. So I was a young person as well, trying to figure this out. So it's kind of funny how we're having this conversation and just like flash these memories up for me. But I think that if we don't get to face that challenge, or if we do have to face that challenge, how are we going to respond if that situation ever comes? And it's so hard to really describe it, in my opinion. And I know that's not what you're saying, but that's what I'm saying, is that it can be hard, especially if you have so many things going on, whether it's your financial security, whether you really need that job, whether it's just a stepping stone and you just got to get through it. I mean, I don't know. There's all kinds of different motivations for that. I don't know if you have anything you want to say in terms of that.
Yeah. Well, look, if you're being bullied, there's a number of things you do. Probably the best, if it's possible, is leave if you're being bullied by your boss, right?
Yep.
Just get out. You're not going to win this battle. Trust me. I've lost this battle. Okay. I've been walked out myself. But what you need to do is you also need to resolve to not ever do that yourself, right? Whatever you do, if you stay there, you leave, whatever you do, don't turn into what you're seeing, right? Simon Sinek has a really great little aphorism. He says, be the boss you wish you had. My codicil to that is, don't be the boss you wish you never met.
But you should get that patented. It's so riveting because for me, like I said, my experience is dealing with bad bosses, which I've had quite a number of them getting to this point in my life and my career. I know that it can be very tumultuous and try to navigate through that, which really is a great segue into something that I saw that you're certified in, which is the tiny habits model. I wonder if you could just tell a little bit to our audience what that is and how that fits in maybe into the framework or either the conversation that we just had, or even just in general with how that applies in life.
Yeah. So tiny habits, for those who don't know, not to be confused with Atomic Habits, which is
a great book. Yeah.
A lot of that's based on the research that informed Tiny Habits. Tiny Habits was created by BJ Fogg, who is a Stanford researcher, and he runs the behavior change clinic at Stanford. Dr. Fogg did a lot of research. He's the researcher. He's not reporting. He's not compiling other people's stuff. He did the work, which is important to realize. And he had a few really great breakthroughs. One is that all behavior comes down to three factors. Every behavior we have, there's three things that happen. One is some sort of motivation, whether you're willing to do it or not. Another is your ability to do it. How hard is it? How easy is it? Right? And the third one is a prompt. Something gets you to do it. Someone asks you to do it. You have a need. You're hungry. You eat. That's your prompt. So everything boils down to those three. And when we try to form new habits or unravel old habits, we tend to lean really heavily on motivation. And motivation is not reliable at all, right? People say, well, just suck it up and do it. Well, that almost never works, and certainly doesn't work over time. Barely scalable at all. And I always use the example, in January, the gyms are filled. In February, the gyms are empty. Why? People were motivated in January, and they lost their motivation for a variety of reasons by February. BJ's idea is, well, instead of playing with motivation, why don't we play with ability? Make it easier to do. Make it so small that it doesn't matter. You want to exercise more? Well, okay, do a little bit of exercise, right? You want to do 100 push-ups a day? Start with, I don't know, 2, right? And all of a sudden, you can do 2, and it's so easy. One of his other really big observations is that we don't form habits over time. I'm sure you've heard 22 days to a new habit, 90 days to a new habit, 6 months. Why are all these different ones? Because none of them are true. You're doing something for 90 days. It's probably a habit already, right? Yeah.
You're saying what was on my mind, so thank you, because I didn't know if I should say it or you should say it.
So how do we form habit? You can form a habit in an instant. All right? And I'll give you an example. If you remember way back when people had flip phones, right? These little gray boxes, right?
Yep.
Not very interesting. Got your first flip phone, you looked at it. When it rang or you needed it, you turned it on, you looked at it. Might have a stupid game in it that you got bored with after 5 minutes. Then one day you got a smartphone. Totally different beast, right? You look at it, it's beautiful, it's interesting, it's got all these colors and lights and apps and all this stuff. And you play with it for a little while and you put it in your pocket. And 5 minutes later, what do?
Pull it back out.
Pull it back. In that instant, you form the habit of looking at your smartphone. What's the difference? Emotion. We form a habit. Every habit we have comes from some emotion, good, bad, or indifferent, right? It's not always positive emotion. So what BJ argues is when we want to form a habit, we need to induce an emotion. And the one he suggests we induce is what he calls shine. And it comes from the feeling of success. It's the emotion of success. And how do you get that? Celebrate. So you do those 2 push-ups and you celebrate. And when you do that, and when you really feel that sense of success, that emotion of success, it becomes a habit. And you'll find yourself doing the push-ups. The other piece is, and I'm kind of doing this backwards, is you need some sort of anchor. Okay, some people call it habit stacking, right? Something you already do, some routine, some other habit. Every day at such and such time, you brush your teeth. Okay, that's your anchor. Immediately afterward, do your 2 push-ups and then celebrate. And then over time, those 2 push-ups will become 5 and 10 and on and on and on. I started this way. I'm using push-ups as an example because I actually did this. I now do over 120 push-ups a day, at least. Okay, 120 push-ups a day.
That's
not all once, not all once, right? But I do them in blocks of 30. And it's habit. I feel like I want to do it, you know? So it's really powerful stuff. But those are really key observations. That thing about emotion is incredible. It really transforms how we understand habit.
Yeah. And habits, when we form them, it's funny because I have a client right now that is going through this, and they have been struggling off and on with this one habit that relates to, ironically enough, we've been talking about exercise, dieting, that whole realm. I've had guests on the show, Jim, that have talked about reinventing the whole fitness industry. You might be interested in talking to them because they would put the ideas that you just talked about upside down, and they'll be like, really, you have that working? So it's actually fascinating to hear you say that, because gyms are a perfect example. But I have somebody we're working with right now, kind of dealing with the same thing and trying to build that good habit. And it doesn't mean that it's a good habit. It's that it's a habit that we need to build. Whether it is good or bad is the emotion. I love that. You break it down that I don't think we often think about. Because if you actually do think about it, though, the marketing that we all see is all based on that emotion, too. So it plays right into that.
Yeah, sure. No, that's a good insight. That's absolutely true. And so BJ has two maxims that he uses. One is help people feel successful. Okay. Notice I didn't say be successful, feel successful. And the other one is help people do what they already want to do. You're not going to actually form the habit if you don't want to do it. If you don't really want to be at the gym, you're not going to go to the gym. And if you force yourself, you're not going to enjoy it. It's never really going to become a habit. It might be something you do, but you're not enjoying it. You're not getting much out of it. If you want to work out, find the ways to work out that help you. How can you get exercise that you want to not just help you, but that you want to do, right? It's much easier. And that's absolutely key.
That is. And I think that's a perfect segue because this one piece of your bio as we get closer to the end really stuck out to me. And it's about Bob Dylan. Now, it literally says to me, ask you anything about Bob Dylan. So I'd
answer.
Yeah. Well, first off, do you know Bob Dylan? I mean, why Bob Dylan?
No.
Oh, no, you don't. Okay. I thought that you'd be one of these conversations with like, oh, yeah, I had a chance encounter. I've been friends with him for like 50 years. This has been awesome.
Yeah. And if I were, I wouldn't be talking because nobody who knows him talks about him.
Yeah.
He's a very private man.
I want to give you that honor, though, for those that are younger and never listened to Bob Dylan. Maybe you want to tell a little bit of who Bob Dylan is.
Who is Bob Dylan? So I do actually have a Bob Dylan podcast called The Dylan Taunts. Believe it or not, I do Bob Dylan research. In fact, your audience can't see, but right behind my head is a book that recently came out with a ponderous title. It came out from Rutledge. I have a chapter in there. That's a recent one. So I do scholarly work on Dylan still, and I have a lot of friends who are in that. And I decided to do a podcast so they can talk about what they're up to. And it's expanded since then. And we actually talk to people. I just did an interview with a family friend who's 19 years old and saw Bob Dylan for the first time.
Wow.
So we do people of all ages. I'm a Gen Xer. Of course, there's a lot of baby boomers. There's millennials involved. We have Gen Zers now. So it's been pretty interesting to sort of bridge the generational divide. But so who is Bob Dylan? To answer your question. Bob Dylan is primarily a songwriter and musician and singer who started out in the 60s. 1961 was his first album. And he was doing folk music. And he's often associated with folk music, but he branched out very much so into rock in the mid 60s and has done rock ever since and some folk, but I would classify him purely as a folk musician. He is considered perhaps the greatest songwriter in the world. He is so amazing as a songwriter, as a lyricist, that he won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2016, which no songwriter had ever done before.
That's amazing.
Yeah, he's a big deal. There's a reason there's conferences and books. Your audience can't see this, but there's several bookshelves over there with books of Dylan. People study him. They think about him. They listen to his music. They go to his concerts. Each and every one is different. You can go see him 2 nights in a row. He used to do different set lists.
Yeah.
Now he has a static set list, pretty much. He might change up 1 or 2 songs, but they can come across very differently. He's 82 years old. He still performs. He just announced some new dates. And it's amazing. It's an amazing experience. It is not a nostalgia experience. Lots of people go to these concerts thinking you're going to hear a little Bobby Dylan playing in the wind on his acoustic guitar. Yeah, you will be disappointed.
Well,
because he changes everything.
Well, I remember when I was growing up and they were talking about Bob Dylan. I don't think they were Bob Dylan fans because I definitely didn't hear anything on the radio when I was riding around with my dad's 88 Dodge Ram pickup truck playing that sort of music. But I will take your word for it, Jim, that he was very successful. Just being that millennial.
Still amazing. And pretty much any music you're listening to now has a Bob Dylan influence. Even hip hop draws on Bob Dylan.
Jim, I have this one final question, and you're probably going to be like, why the heck are you asking me that? That's really silly of you. So I somehow got to bridge Bob Dylan into all this conversation that we've had this last half hour and ask you this. Do you want to be the Bob Dylan of the speaking world? I told you you're going to laugh at it.
Oh my God. I don't know if I want to be the Bob Dylan of anything.
Yeah.
It's a tough life in some ways. No, I don't want to be the Bob Dylan of the speaking world. I want to be the Jim Salvucci of the speaking world. I want to get on stages and I want to help people in my way. I don't need fame. I don't need a house in Malibu. I don't need to sell my speeches for record amounts and whatever. No, I have no interest in that. Different
That was the answer. That was the answer I was looking for. So you handled that very well. I was getting nervous that maybe if I asked it, you'd be like, let's kind of avoid that question. But you handled that very well. Be you. That was the message I got out of it. So with that said, Jim, we're at the end of our time, but I want to give you the last few minutes here. I know that you do coaching. You're entering the speaking world. How can people reach out to you if they're interested in contacting you? Maybe they have some questions, being a young leader themselves, that they want to get some assistance with. Maybe they have some pressing Bob Dylan questions they want to ask you too.
You never know.
You never know. You never know. Actually, I know of one friend, and if that friend messages me, I will let you know who that is. But how can they get in contact with you? I'll give you the last few minutes.
Yeah, so I have my website. My company is Guidance for Greatness, and my website is guidanceforgreatness.com. Simple enough. If you go to the bottom of the homepage, there is a link. Just sign in and you can receive my newly gussied up freebie. I have a free gift for people, and it is what I call the Transform to Greatness Toolkit. And it is a way of helping people guide themselves to great leadership, starting with an exploration of their values. And there's 5 points to it, and each one of them comes complete with a tiny habit recipe. So you can actually put things right into practice and build some habits around it. Also, I have a newsletter, blog, and podcast I put out every week. I just read the newsletter because some people like to hear it rather than read it. And that is called On Leading with Greatness. It's on Substack, and it's at jimsalvucci.substack.com. And my last name is Salvucci. So jimsalvucci.substack.com. Those are 2 primary ways to interface with me. So you can check out my newsletter and podcast, and you could also go to my website.
Jim, this was a lot of great conversation. I think that young leaders definitely need to be mentored in this world, especially this world that's ever changing. That's the mission of even my coaching business, Your Speaking Voice. And I think that's so important to continue this conversation in the ways in which we can influence and even navigate through those channels. I think you gave some really important advice. And of course, if Bob Dylan wants to make an appearance and also sing for us while we're doing that, that would be just the cream of the crop.
I would not hold my breath.
No, I am not holding my breath either, but just in case he falls across this, hello, Bob Dylan. With all that said, Jim, thanks a lot for being on Speaking from the Heart today. Yeah. It was a great honor to have you on.
Yeah, appreciate it, Joshua. This has been great. I enjoyed it.
I want to thank Jim again for being part of the show and sharing not only his experiences as being a leader, but also understanding that in the context of the world that we live in, there are all kinds of different people, all kinds of different individuals that we face, whether it's in our personal or professional, even in our businesses, that we have to address. And sometimes we have to do calculated risk to determine whether we should be approaching them head on to even deal with some of the problems that they might bring, not only on themselves, but on others for that matter. And I love that our conversation circled around a variety of different themes, because it also creates this understanding that it isn't just about one piece of the overall puzzle that we're looking at. It's looking at the whole perspective that we might be the problem. It isn't just about the individuals that we interact with, but it might be something that happens internally with us. I think that we have to understand, though, that when we go through these processes, we go through these conversations, we have to see it from all sides. But it doesn't give you an excuse to be a bully. And I love that Jim said this exactly during our interview, that if you bully your employees, you are incompetent. I believe we have to think about that concept a little bit more, even from what we have discussed during today's interview. Because it isn't just about our employees, it's about us. It's about the things that we sometimes stuff in a sack, as Jim put it, that we often hide from the whole entire world to address. Because we have all these different things happening to us, all these different aspects of our life, that we might have credence to bully someone else, it still doesn't give us the free ticket to do the same. And that always leads to some disastrous consequences, especially if you're never thinking about the other person's perspective. During the interview, Jim talking about this made me think about all the different times in my life personally in which I was bullied. Growing up, I was teased so much about my weight, the way that I looked, and the way that I even handled myself, which even on this show I've talked about my autism diagnosis and how that has really changed the game in understanding so many different perspectives, not only about myself, but about others as well. It has helped me to understand a perspective that oftentimes has been misunderstood by others, but at the same token, it has helped me to learn so much about myself and to stop putting things in a sack, to stop putting things away when I know that I need to face it head on. I think of leaders, even Bob Dylan, which we talked about on the show today, that help us to understand what that looks like. And Bob Dylan does it through his music. Other people do it through their words. We have amazing authors, amazing speakers. We have all kinds of people that do a variety of different trades. But we have to learn that sometimes stuffing it in a sack, hiding it away from the world to understand what we're going through, doesn't only hurt ourselves, but it hurts our overall ability to grow with others. So if we are bullying, not only are we incompetent, but we're stunting our growth. We're unable to move from that big mountain range that we're stuck on, being able to climb down. We're oftentimes left alone, thinking that we are doing the right things, but people don't know how to approach us because of the things that we have been through. They don't know how to approach us because we have been through some tough challenges in our life, but we don't know how to communicate those effectively. But that is the key to all of this. Even at a young age, you have to learn how to communicate more effectively so that you never have to go down that path. Which is why I asked my parents on this show, talk to your children more, get them to open up, form a relationship, regardless of how hard it might be. Get them off their phones, get them to talk to you face to face. It's time to have that conversation because we're losing a generation of people, kids for that matter, that don't know how to communicate. Thankfully, we have people like Dr. Salvucci that are willing to challenge the status quo and help other people, especially at a young age, willing to learn the skills so that they can celebrate those successes. But yes, those celebrations need to start small and grow ever bigger. The concept of even doing a push-up, which I can't even do myself, and I know that I need to go back in the gym and work out more. That's something that I'm working on here in the next few months with my friends over at Next Generation Personal Training. But I know that I need to celebrate those small successes when I restart my fitness journey. Even if the things are very small in nature and they don't matter to anyone else, we need to celebrate them personally because the biggest cheerleader that's in our corner is ourselves. If we're able to enjoy what we have been able to achieve, of course it's always going to build upon itself, and that will allow us to accomplish things that we normally will never be able to accomplish. I know that finding those moments of enjoyment, that emotion that we have inside of ourselves, can be very difficult. It can be very painful to overcome, maybe even create that atmosphere of understanding, having that level of engagement, having those abilities that we have to pull out of our sack and bring back to the light and let the things that are not so good about them be bleached by the sun. Because if we're able to do that, if we're able to create that context in our life in which we are no longer being viewed as the bully, if we're able to overcome the things that we have standing in our way and be able to lead from the front, we are not just leaders, but we're also part of a team. Jim said something very minuscule that I want to point out that is really important to this whole entire conversation. And it's the difference between what a manager is and what a leader is. Now, you might have taken his conversation today to mean more about the workplace and what's typically involved with going through that process of having a manager versus a leader. But this application also happens in our life. We have families. We have friends. We have people that are personally close to us that might look at us as a leader. But sometimes we're playing the role of a manager because we're helping them get through the different obstacles that are happening in their life. It's important to wear not just the manager hat in our lives, but also the leader hat. Because if we're able to do both of those, not only are we able to push ourselves forward, not only are we able to create that important context, not only are we able to demonstrate that we're effective in what we're supposed to be doing and what we're supposed to be creating, we are able to find things in our life that not only give us moments of enjoyment, but also engagement of the emotion, the living essence of why we as human beings thrive. 12 years ago, I made a decision to join Toastmasters, which for my long-term listeners, you know what it's all about. But for those that are just joining, Toastmasters is an amazing organization. It's international across the world. If you're ever interested in checking out Toastmasters, go to www.toastmasters.org, and I'll leave a link in the episode notes in which you can check out a club that's closest to you. Dr. Ralph Smedley, the founder of that organization, always said that we learn best in the moments of enjoyment. And I've been challenged even recently in one of my Toastmaster clubs to challenge that status quo, to keep on moving my needle forward, especially with the new generation, especially with the new members of our club that know nothing about what Toastmasters really stands for. This is a moment that has come full circle for me. I have been a manager and I have been a leader, but I have never been a manager and leader at the same time like I am right now for my very club that I belong to. It has been something that I have really enjoyed, but at the same time, it has gotten me emotional about why it's so important to be able to lead, to be able to communicate, to not be a bully, because there was a lot of bullying that was happening at this particular club. But now the status quo has been changing because now they have seen the light. They have seen the opportunities that even if you celebrate very small, which is what we do in Toastmasters, we're able to create that enjoyment where it really counts the most. I know that it's so easy for us on a daily basis to just stuff the things that have really hurt us and have really truly caused pain and frustration into a sack, putting it behind a wall, just deleting it, especially if it's an email that we don't like. But sometimes those are the things that we need to read. That is the feedback that we oftentimes need to receive in order to keep moving, to keep growing, to keep being the best versions of ourselves. Remember that when you do something right, it's okay to celebrate it. Even those very small things can make all the difference in terms of not only what you're creating, but also what you're enjoying. What we have as an experiment happening in America and all across the world, which has been happening since human civilization began, is how we connect with each other through storytelling, music, folklore, all kinds of other things. I can understand why Dr. Salvucci really likes Bob Dylan and why he enjoys listening and learning more about Bob Dylan's success. It's really simple if you think about it. It's a passion. It's something that we can all come together around. We can enjoy those moments, even if it's around music, rock and roll, folk music, regardless of what it is. We don't have to be bullies when it comes to a commonality. We don't have to stuff that away. We can be loud and be very proud of these types of things to celebrate, because those are the things that bring us together. So if we can do that with music, if we can do that with writing, if we can do that with any type of creative adventure, can't we do it for our leadership? Can we stop being bullies to each other and find common ground? I think this is so timely, especially in a world that sometimes is ridiculed, condemned, and complaining about why society has failed. We just need to get back to the basics. And if we can learn how to lead, if we can learn how to grow, if we can learn how to even celebrate, trust me on this. Not only are you going to be better, we are all going to be better at the same time. Thanks for listening to episode number 136 of Speaking from the Heart, and I look forward to hearing from your heart very soon.
Thanks for listening. For more information about our podcast and future shows, search for Speaking from the Heart to subscribe and be notified wherever you listen to your podcasts. Visit us at www.yourspeakingvoice.biz for more information about potential services that can help you create the best version of yourself. See you next time.